It is the penultimate race of the season, one that can decide everything right here, right now. And qualifying was just over like 5 minutes ago, so let's talk about it. But before that, this weekend is a sprint weekend, so first of all, we have to go through what happened in the first part of the weekend on the sprint qualifying and sprint race. If you don't want to watch anything of analysis related to that, you can just skip to the timestamp right here or around here, and yeah, you can watch the qualifying alone. So, sprint qualifying, some key points about that session. First of all, Piastri, he was amazing around the track, he got pole position for the sprint. Lando was only able to get P3, so he's in the prime position to get some points from Lando, and he did that by winning the sprint race after that. Verstappen was a little bit further below, just in P6, and was out-qualified for the first time by his teammate in this year and probably in a long time. So it was not a great session for him, a lot of problems with the Red Bull. The pace didn't seem to be there also in the race because he couldn't overtake Lando, although he could overtake his teammate, but overall he lost 1 point and is now very close from being eliminated from the fight of the championship. And my second highlight of the sprint qualifying is Fernando Alonso, because he was just amazing. These sprint weekends only have one practice, so you have to make the most out of it. And if there's one thing that Alonso is very good at, is he excels at extracting everything the car is capable of giving. And of course, being a very experienced driver makes him much more quicker to optimize the setup of his car, even if he only has 1 hour to do it. So it was a very good session for him because he entered SQ1 basically very competitive already, and when he got to SQ3 he was able to put that Aston Martin in P4. Ultimately he ended up losing 2 places in the start for Tsunoda and for Verstappen, and then he got a little greedy on the last turn, made a mistake and was overtaken by Antonelli. But still, he scored points in a sprint race in a Aston Martin. Still a very good result, and after the qualifying, I'm believing that the Aston Martin is pretty good and probably will score some points this weekend. And my third highlight goes to the Ferraris, especially Lewis Hamilton, who was eliminated once again in the first part of the qualifying. SQ1 was terrible for him, absolutely garbage, and he's completely done. And this weekend wasn't too good for Leclerc either. He only qualified P9. Yes, he got to SQ3, but only in P9. And as we're going to see later, the qualifying is not much better. The Ferrari is just not working around here. And more troubling for Hamilton, for the sprint, he started from the pit lane because he was already qualifying P18, only in front of the 2 Alpines in the sprint qualifying, so he decided to do something. He decided that he wanted to change rear wing. And why did he decide to do that? Because basically, his top speed during the sprint qualifying was terrible, one of the lowest ones. So perhaps he thought, maybe let's try to get a new rear wing, change the setup and see if it makes the car any quicker. But it didn't. The car was slow, very slow. He was one of the slowest drivers in the sprint. So it was a disaster for the first part of the weekend for Ferrari, and the qualifying was not very good either. But before advancing to the qualifying, let's take a quick look at the global race pace from each driver in this sprint race. Piastri was the fastest, followed by Russell and Norris. No surprises there, Piastri was of course faster than those two. Then you have Verstappen, which was a little bit slower, but still faster than all the other guys. But the 2 outliers really in this graphic are the Ferraris once again. Leclerc and Hamilton had really terrible pace. Leclerc was stuck in traffic throughout most of the race, so it's kind of understandable that he has bad pace. But Hamilton, look at that, he was just the second to last in terms of pace. After starting in the pit lane, after making setup changes, changing the rear wing to a low downforce one, it still didn't help at all the car. If anything, it looks to be slower. It's a very worrying sign. He's completely out of his mojo and he seems lost. So that's all for the sprint. Let's go on to the best part of this weekend so far, the qualifying. And let me tell you, this was a very good qualifying. And you could not script this. The top 3 are, of course, Piastri, Verstappen, and Norris. Of course, not in this order. Piastri did get the pole position for the main race, which is amazing. Second pole position in a row in this weekend. And Lando got second place. They were absolutely trading blows throughout both of their laps, and in the end, Piastri came out on top. This is particularly interesting to see because he's been out of his mojo for a while now, making a lot of mistakes, a lot of crashes, that cost him pretty much the whole championship that he was leading comfortably. And with all that pressure over his shoulders, he was able to perform, and he is now in a very good position to outscore Lando in the main race. Verstappen doesn't seem to have the same pace as they have in qualifying trim, but the race pace might be very different. Red Bull changed the setup in between the sprint race and the qualifying, so tomorrow might be a very different story. But starting behind Lando is not ideal, so I'm very interested to see how the approach for each driver is going to be tomorrow, because Piastri has to win it if he wants to keep its contention in the championship. Verstappen has to be very, very aggressive, and we all know that he is, because if he finishes behind Lando, it's over for him. And Lando just has to play it safe, because the way that the championship is right now, if he finishes both races in a good position, he will win it. For now, let's analyze what happened in the qualifying, because there was some interesting stuff going on there. And so for this video, I picked 3 fights that I think can be worth analyzing. One of them is the fight between Piastri and Norris, because they were so closely matched that I really want to see where the differences between both of the laps were. The other is the comparison between Piastri and Verstappen. Since Verstappen was kind of far away from the McLarens that were very closely matched, I want to see where the limitation of the Red Bull was. There was a specific corner that it was worse in. Was there any part of the track that he could have explored more? I think that's worth taking a look into. And for the last one, I want to talk about the driver that didn't finish in the top 3. And I could talk about Adjar because he qualified P6, very good. Or Sainz that finished P7, also very, very good. Alonso qualified P8, which is also a good result. Gasly made an incredible performance finishing P9, which is a very good result for an Alpine. But I want to talk about Charles Leclerc, because the Ferraris had an absolute horrendous qualifying today. Hamilton was out in Q1, and despite reaching Q3, Leclerc was just P10. So without further ado, let's get into the comparison between Piastri's lap and Charles. So here's the telemetry for Piastri's best lap in Q3 against Leclerc's best lap in Q3, and basically there are some key points here. And I want to say that in the onboard, I really didn't see much of a difference. Like you can't look at Leclerc's lap and tell exactly where is going wrong, because at least for me it's kind of difficult. There is one situation that I could identify one thing, but I'll get to that. But overall, it didn't look that bad. So where did he actually lose time? Well, that's easy to see in this graphic. He was losing time in turns 4, 5, 7, 10 and 12 to 15. And why these corners specific? Well, because they are essentially medium speed corners. And the pattern for all these turns is basically the same. Let's look at turn 4 and 5 for example. Leclerc isn't able to keep as much speed as Piastri does. He has to brake for longer. And the same thing happens in turn 10. Leclerc is braking for longer and doesn't keep as much speed as Piastri does on exit. Throughout turns 13, 14 and especially 15, Piastri is always able to maintain a good advantage in terms of speed. Leclerc even has to brake at a point before turn 15. And if that's not enough, if that wasn't enough problems for him, he still has one more. He gets a little bit of porpoising out of 15, which is the bottoming of the car on the ground. And as you just saw in the onboard, turn 15 is a very, very demanding turn, because it's so aggressive. You have to turn in with all your might, because you need all the downforce that you can get. And the Ferrari doesn't have that kind of downforce. He even had to brake when Piastri, for example, didn't. And if you're wondering what happened to Hamilton, it was kind of the same. I think there were one or two problems extra to this problem that it's inherent to the Ferrari, but the overall was still the same but worse than Leclerc. He was losing even more time than Leclerc, but in the same turns more or less. And before the next analysis, please consider liking the video if you're enjoying it, and if you like this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep up with the new releases. Next up is the battle between the contenders for the championship, Piastri and Verstappen, and in this one it was very clear. Verstappen got a very good first sector because of the first turn, and the main difference is that Verstappen was able to go on throttle much faster than Piastri on exit, and thanks to that he gained a lot of time there, and that gap would slightly maintain itself throughout turns 3 and 4, but on turn 5 Piastri got back at him. By maintaining a higher speed through that corner, he was able to regain a little bit of the time that he had lost previously. Sector 2 they were very well matched. Piastri was quicker in some of the parts, Verstappen was quicker on the others, and in the end the gap was pretty much at 0. But just like we saw before with Leclerc, but to a lesser extent here, Sector 3 is the main deciding factor in this lap, because you see Verstappen isn't able to carry as much speed throughout the high speed and medium speed corners as the McLaren does. Especially in turns 14-15, it's very difficult for him to keep up the pace with the McLaren. So it just ends up bleeding time over that whole sequence of curves, and although he tries to regain a little bit in the last corner, it's not enough and he keeps on losing, and just in that sector alone he loses 0.3 of a second to Piastri, and that's where the McLaren master pace comes into play, because the car is so quick throughout that kind of corners that Max had no other option but to concede. And finally we get to our battle for the pole position, and before I show you the telemetry, let me give you a disclaimer, because this data, it's not FIA given, so the data is not public, so there are always errors, and in this case the gaps are so close to each other that the gap shown in the delta time final, it's not the same as the race, it's a little bit different. But even so, in most cases it is enough for us to understand what's really going on, and yeah, take it for what you can get from it and not for the concrete values. So let's get into it. So, starting by sector 1, Lando starts a little bit behind after turn 1, but regains it in turn 3 and gets ahead for a little bit. Then, the real game changer comes in turn 6, because that's when the trade of blows begins. And once again, it comes down to a battle of styles. Once again, as in Brazil, I was talking a little bit about Norris having a U-shaped corner style, while Piastri tends to be more a V-shaped corner style, and this comes into display here. But while in Brazil he wasn't able to make that work, here the car was behaving much differently and he was able to extract a lot more. And turn 6 is a very interesting one, because Piastri was already gaining on the entry, and then when they started the curve, basically he went for a better rotation of the car, as it's typical in V-style, and he gained a lot on exit. And that's the reason why you see that jump to around 1/10 of a second, because that's what he gained there. And in turn 7 it was a similar story, but with Lando gaining a little bit on entry, because he was going for a little bit of an early apex. He managed to get in front for a little bit, but Piastri got such a better rotation of the car mid-corner that he was able to power down much faster, and after turn 10 basically Piastri was for good in front of Lando. And despite what the data here says, if you see the video that F1 put on their Instagram of this section, you will see that Piastri is ahead throughout all sector 3. The only part of the sector 3 where Lando makes a little bit of a try is in the last turn, because once again it's the same old story. Piastri just goes for a better rotation and better exit, so he loses a little bit to Lando on the entry, but he gains it all back on the exit, and Lando ends up really being behind him 1/10 of a second. It's a really interesting battle, two different styles of driving. One isn't better than the other, they just work differently, and sometimes can be better, sometimes can be worse, and it has to do with a lot of factors, not only the style of course. If all goes well, this video will be coming out before the race and you'll be watching it a few minutes or hours before the race. And so I'd like to make a few predictions on what's going to happen, because this weekend is going to be a little bit different in terms of the main race, because we have a mandatory 2 stops, indirectly because the FIA only put a maximum lap range on the tires, so you cannot go more than 25 laps on one tire. Since the race is 51 laps, you have to make 2 stops. And from what I've seen in the sprint race, I think at least the hards could comfortably do more than 25 laps, so I wouldn't be surprised if there was someone doing some bold stuff. I would very much like to see someone starting on the softs to be aggressive at the beginning. Maybe Verstappen could go for that, like 8 laps of softs and then strap on 2 sets of mediums for like 22 laps each. Maybe that could be a good strat for him. Maybe if there is a safety car early, we can see some drivers going into the pits early to get on with a normal one-stopper, kind of one-stopper. So that will be kind of interesting to see. And I'm also predicting that turn 1 is going to be chaotic. I think we're going to see one of the top 3 drivers at the back of the grid by the end of lap 1. At least that's what I think is going to happen. And if I was in Lando's shoes, I would absolutely let Max through, because he will be driving like a madman. He will want to go for the race win, and if Lando finishes in P3 in both races, probably he is champion. I didn't make the calculations to see if he's still going to be champion, but I believe that he is. If you have any bold predictions of yourself, don't forget to leave them down below. I would love to hear them, and if not, I will see you in the next video to talk about the race results. Bye bye.